Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Siobhan Mullally. I'm Director of the Irish Centre for Human Rights here at the University of Galway and also UN Special Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children. And I'm delighted to be invited to chair this afternoon's panel, which is focusing on the topic of gender-based violence. I'm just going to briefly introduce each speaker before they present, and we'll take questions and open up for discussion and comments at the end of the panel. So our opening speaker is our very own Amani Issa. Amani is a PhD researcher and Hardiman Scholar at the Irish Centre for Human Rights. At the Irish Centre for Human Rights and at the Centre for Disability Law and Policy. And her work examines the intersections of gender and disability within the framework of gender-based violence in colonial struggles, with a particular focus on Palestine as a case study. Previously, prior to commencing her PhD research, Amani worked as a legal consultant with the World Bank on the Women, Business and the Law project. And in this role, she analysed the rights of women with disabilities across 190 economies, advocating for gender and disability inclusive laws. And her professional journey also includes diverse roles in human trafficking, period poverty, and environmental and health rights advocacy. Over to you, Amani. Thank you.
Can you all hear me well? Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Amani. I'm a Palestinian native, born and raised in the beautiful occupied Palestine, particularly in Bethlehem, which I'm pretty sure some of you heard about it in the Bible. I also realize it's an international audience from different backgrounds. All is welcome. And you may not agree with me and with what I'm going to speak about, but I do ask you to respect my presentation and validate my experience as a Palestinian disabled woman. Thank you. So today's presentation is a small part of my larger research around the experiences of disabled women of gender-based violence through a settler colonial framework, the case of Palestine. This research comes from a very strong experience of mine as a disabled Palestinian woman who grew up under a brutal colonial regime in an able-bodied patriarchal society. I mentioned before that I haven't been long in the disability studies field. I have been in the human rights field, exploring, navigating my way through it. It's indeed and a fact that feminist movement left out disabled women and disability as a concept out of the discourse for a very long time. However, disability studies is still global north white dominant. It still leaves out disabled women from the global south from the broader conversation. It often fails to address their experiences, and especially there's an anxiety in this field to have a conversation on disability and colonialism, its impact on law and legal structures, and the role of the global north within this context, especially on Palestine. There's a huge silence in this field. So the definition of violence, which I'm adopting throughout, is violence accomplished by physical force, legal compulsion, economic coercion, intimidation, psychological manipulation, deception, and misinformation, in which absence of free and informed consent is a key analytical component. In situations of armed conflict, military occupation, natural disasters, and humanitarian emergencies, women and girls with disabilities face a heightened vulnerability to gender-based violence, particularly during conflict, when the rate of gender sexual violence escalates significantly. Conflict increases the vulnerability of persons with disabilities in general, particularly women and girls with disabilities and their families, through the breakdown of economic structures, healthcare institutions and facilities, family and community support, educational opportunities, housing, transportation, and other infrastructure. Women and girls with disability, which is a huge problem, they remain largely excluded from gender-based violence prevention programs, including women's empowerment initiatives that aim to break the cycle of vulnerability to violence. It's been found that attitudinal barriers such as discrimination, stigmatization by family members, service providers, and the wider community were the most commonly cited barriers accessing gender-based violence services for conflict-affected women with disabilities. Additionally, complex situations increase the vulnerability of women and girls who are already disabled because they may be forced to leave their wheelchairs, medication, assisted aids, and animals and prosthetic behind, and they lose their carers and family support, like the scene we're seeing in Gaza today. Now, Palestinian women and girls with disabilities, they endure multi-level injustices, exacerbated by the intersection of occupation, gender discrimination, and disability-based discrimination. Living in a society under occupation, their rights are regularly and systematically violated. Additionally, they face gender-based discrimination in various forms, including disparities in employment, wages, access to public position, and exposure to violence and abuse. Disability-based discrimination is another element which makes it intersectional. Understanding the experience of disabled women in Palestine against gender-based violence really requires us to recognize the broader context of occupation and Israeli colonial rule. It's not enough to analyze the experience of disabled women against gender-based violence separately, but we need to recognize the fact that there is a colonial rule. For these women, gender-based violence extends beyond intimate partner violence commonly associated with the topic in the Western academia and in the West in general. They experience violence from multiple sources. They experience from the occupation, patriarchal and ableist societal structures, and the absence of functional redress systems to challenge or remedy diverse forms of violence they face. To understand the experiences of disabled women facing gender-based violence in Palestine, we need to consider the impact of colonialism, as I've mentioned before. Colonial rule had marginalized Palestinian communities for long decades, increasing their vulnerabilities and systemic inequalities. Disabled women who are affected by both disability and gender sectionality face even greater oppression. Colonial policies limit their access to resources, movement, and legal protection, worsening gender-based violence. Using a colonial approach helps us better analyze the structures that perpetuate these injustices and provide deeper insight into the unique challenges disabled women in Palestine encounter. In this picture displayed on the slide, there's a Palestinian disabled woman on a wheelchair passing through Kalandia checkpoint outside the West Bank city of Ramallah as she makes her way to Jerusalem, assisted by male healthcare workers surrounded by Israeli soldiers. This picture was taken July 27, 2012. Now, the number of persons with disabilities in Palestine is estimated about 115,000 persons, with approximately 59,000 persons in the West Bank and approximately 58,000 persons in Gaza Strip. Now, it's important to mention that these statistics were taken in early 2023, and this is likely to be underreporting disability since the global average is 16%. The occupied Palestinian territory is one of the highest places with persons with disability compared to the size of its population. And according to many reports, the number of persons with disabilities in Palestine, especially in Gaza, is likely to triple up by the end of 2024. In this picture displayed, Lama Al-Agha at the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, southern Gaza Strip, October 31st, 2023. Lama lost her right limb, endured a head injury, resulted in psychological trauma. More than 10,000 children have become disabled. As Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta, a witness, he said, "This is the biggest cohort of pediatric amputees in the entire history." Although extensive research exists on gender-based violence experienced by women and girls with disabilities in different conflict areas, the situation in Palestine has often been overlooked. Also, data on violence against women and girls with disabilities in that region are largely lacking, really making it difficult to assess the prevalence of this violence, its form, levels, determinants, such as what types of disability are more subjected to violence, who the perpetrators are, in which geographic location, among others. Notably, women and girls with disabilities in Palestine tend to be the most economically marginalized and right-deprived group in the entire region in the Middle East and North Africa. Now, the fragmentation of Palestine profoundly affects the experiences of disabled women, compounding their vulnerability, exacerbating the challenges they face. This fragmentation is characterized by physical, social, and political divides, resulting in military occupation, separation barriers, and internal political division. These factors collectively intensify the marginalization and isolation of disabled women in several ways. The existing gender-based violence against disabled women and girls is perpetuated by Israel colonial rule in Palestine. So first, I'll be talking about the physical fragmentation, restricted movement and access. The extended network of checkpoints, walls, and barriers in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem severely restrict movement within and between Palestinian territories. This physical fragmentation has profound implication for disabled women and gender-based violence survivors. The confinement created by these barriers increase women's dependency on potentially abusive family members, reducing their ability to seek help to escape violent situation. And this restriction further isolates disabled women, making them more vulnerable to abuse due to their limited ability to connect with external support networks. And disabled women who often require regular medical care, rehabilitation services, and assistive devices face significant difficulties accessing these essential services. The barriers and the checkpoints impede their ability to receive consistent and adequate care. Movement restriction also hinder access to legal aid and social services necessary for gender-based violence survivors. This lack of access makes it challenging for disabled women to receive support they need to escape abusive situation and pursue justice. And the physical obstacles, transportation challenges significantly hinder the ability of disabled women to lead independent lives, increasing their dependence on others and making them more exposed to exploitation and abuse. Next is increased militarization of violence. The pervasive military presence by Israel and frequent incursion make a climate of fear and violence. Women are often subjected to harassment and abuse by soldiers, officers, and investigators, and the overall atmosphere of violence which normalizes gender-based violence. And the ongoing conflict and resultant lawlessness can lead to an increase in criminal activities, including gender-based violence. The instability makes it difficult for law enforcement to effectively address and prevent gender-based violence. Economic marginalization, colonial policies normally contribute to high unemployment rate and economic instability. The limited access to essential resources such as clean water, electricity, and healthcare exacerbate the daily struggle of Palestinian women, increasing their vulnerability to exploitation and abuse. Humanitarian aid and development programs are often unevenly distributed across fragmented Palestinian territories. Disabled women in less accessible or politically marginalized areas may receive inadequate support, exacerbating their hardship and reducing their resilience to crises. Social fragmentation, disruption, and community breakdown. In fragmented society, the stigma surrounding both disability and gender can be heightened. Disabled women may face compound discrimination within their communities, where traditional and patriarchal views may be more entrenched due to social and economic stress. The division of Palestinian territory disrupts community networks and social support systems. Disabled women who rely heavily on these networks for assistance and social interaction suffer from increased isolation. The breakdown of extended family and community support structures leave them more vulnerable to neglect and abuse. Displacement and housing insecurity, forced displacement, home demolition, and the building of the illegal Israeli settlement disrupt community network and social support system. Women who are displaced or living in refugee camps face heightened risk of gender-based violence due to lack of privacy and protection. Most importantly, legal and institutional barriers. The complex legal environment where Israeli military law govern Palestinian occupied territories often result in impunity for perpetrators of gender-based violence. Women face significant barriers in seeking justice due to discriminatory law and practices. The political divide between the authority in the West Bank and Gaza Strip lead to inconsistent policies and services for disabled individuals. Disabled women may experience a lack of uniform support and protection, creating disparities in the availability and quality of services across different regions. The fragmented legal and institutional framework often fail to provide adequate protection for women against gender-based violence. The absence of effective legal resource and protection mechanisms leave women vulnerable to ongoing abuse. Therefore, disabled women may find it difficult to seek justice and protection due to bureaucratic hurdles and a lack of coordinated effort between different government bodies, as in every city in Palestine is governed by different authority, by different law. And psychological impact, of course, the stress and uncertainty caused by living in a fragmented and conflict-ridden society take a heavy toll on mental health. Disabled women already coping with the challenges of their at the intersection of their gender and disability experience compounded issues of anxiety, depression, and trauma, make it more challenging to seek help and recover. And the power imbalances created by colonialism throughout the history reinforce patriarchal norms and exacerbate the subjugation of women. These dynamics contribute to a culture where gender-based violence is more likely to occur and be tolerated. And the pressure of living in a fragmented society can strain family relationships, sometimes leading to domestic violence. Disabled women who be more vulnerable within these family dynamics face increased risk of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. Last but not least, educational institutional barriers, colonial policies that restrict educational opportunities for Palestinians disproportionately affect women and girls. Lack of education limit their awareness of rights and available resources to combat gender-based violence. Movement restriction, the building, the settlement, and demolition of schools also hindered the implementation of effective awareness campaign about gender-based violence and available support services. Now, this quote reads, "Disability justice is a politic of peace, anti-empire, and anti-war and colonization," written by Leah Lakshmi Pepienza Samar Sinha, a Sri Lankan author, poet, and disability rights activist from a blog post called Palestine is Disabled, part of Disability Visibility Project. Colonialism is a mass disabling event. Now, what you can do, use your voice and platform to advocate for the rights of disabled individuals and women in Palestine and Gaza. Identify and support grassroots organization and initiative. Donate resources if you can. Volunteer your time and offer expertise strengthen their efforts on the ground. Share what you've learned about the challenges faced by disabled women in Palestine and Gaza with your networks. Use social media, presentation, and other platforms to raise awareness and foster dialogue about disability rights and justice in the region. Collaborate if you can with disability rights activists, organizations, and stakeholders from Palestine and Gaza to exchange knowledge and resources. Most importantly, stay informed, stay connected, and continue to take action to create positive change and promote justice for all. Remember that collective liberation is disability justice. The issue of Palestine is connected to so many justice issues around the world. Most importantly, I would like to ask the audience, if they can, to sign the open letter to the international disability rights community, which has been signed by thousands of activists and disability rights community, to ask the disability rights community internationally that they cannot remain silent on Gaza. You can visit www.breakingthesilenceongaza.org. And also, we'd like you to also, if you can't have time, to read another great article by Alice Wong. It's titled, "Why Palestinian Liberation is Disability Justice." You can visit disabilityvisibilityproject.com. I think it was very informative and beautifully written and eye-opening as well. And this article, there's a sketch used by Alice Wong of Ibrahim Abu Thuraya, which I would like to tell you his story quickly. So Ibrahim Abu Thuraya, he was a 29-year-old Palestinian man. In this photo, he was protesting the US decision to move his embassy to Jerusalem in 2017. Holding high a peace sign and a Palestinian flag in a wheelchair as a double amputee with no legs. He was killed by an Israeli sniper shortly after this picture was taken. Ibrahim actually lost his legs and a kidney in an Israeli airstrike back in 2008. And before I finish, I would just want to thank the Center for Disability Law and Policy and the Irish Center for Human Rights for being consistent and constantly giving platform for Palestinian researchers and students in a time where our voices are constantly censored, punished, and eradicated. And I'm really grateful. Thank you so much. Shukran.
Thank you very much to Amani for a very powerful presentation. And I want to acknowledge that the presentation is taking place against the background of an ongoing conflict where we've seen over 30,000 people killed, including thousands and thousands of children, and many more people injured and missing. So I certainly urge you and encourage you to engage in the advocacy around rights of people with disabilities in Palestine and to add your voices to that struggle. Our next speaker is Eliona Jechai. Eliona is a PhD candidate in disability studies at the University of Iceland. researching the experience of gender-based violence and access to justice for disabled women in Iceland. She's a graduate of the LLM in International and Comparative Disability Law and Policy here at Galway, and is also a graduate of the BA International degree on Sociology and Political Science and Spanish. Since 2019, Eliona has been serving on the first ever Statutory Disability Advisory Committee in Ireland, appointed by the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission. And her research interests include access to justice, disability rights, intersectionality, inclusive education, and advocacy. Over to you, Eliona. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me? I'm usually very loud, so having two microphones is unnecessary. Hi, everybody. I will be talking to you about my research and practically focusing on the barriers and facilitators of access to justice for disabled women with regards to gender-based violence. When you get your these slides, you have my email address there, as well as you can read that my supervisor is Professor Emerita Renvik Trøstedóttir, and co-supervisor is Professor Anna Lawson from the University of Leeds. How do I do this again? Hey. And just briefly, before I talk about barriers, I just want to explain my research. So my research was part of the DARE project, Disability Advocacy Research in Europe. It is based in Iceland. It was also meant to be based in UK, but COVID didn't allow that. The focus is the capturing and the gathering of the voices and the experiences of disabled women, as well as those supporting them throughout detection, reporting, investigation, and prosecution of gender-based violence in Iceland. Here you also have the aims of my study, which is to develop recommendations for the empowerment of women, chart pathways for advocacy, and develop law and policies for reform in line with the CRPD. Just briefly, my methodology is a human rights approach together with qualitative methods. I won't go much into detail on this, but just because it will become useful to know, the qualitative methods are combined in semi-structured interviews, court observations, and document analysis, which more or less focuses on public and private court documents, life stories of women, and in national and international law and policy, particularly with focus on CRPD's Article 6 on women, 13 on access to justice, and 16 on violence. There are three groups of participants in my study, the first being disabled women with different ages, types of impairments, sexual orientation, gender identities, and living across Iceland. And the second group is professionals working within support structures and justice structures or justice system, such as rights protection officers or RPOs that I'll be referring, and you'll be seeing it throughout the slide, police, lawyer, prosecutor, judges, special judges, and also staff members at different support structures. And the third group was experts on disability, on violence, and on the Icelandic justice system. So altogether, I did 36 interviews, so 16 with disabled women, 15 with professionals, and 5 with justice workers. And here, this slide has the title Finding. The picture, I could not find a way to make it screen reader accessible, but I'm available for those to explain the graph, and I'll be talking more or less. So in this graph, I have tried to capture all my findings. If you're not familiar with an XY graph, you can just visualize a plus sign, which divides the screen in 4 squares, if you like. 2 on the left and 2 on the right. And on the bottom left one, I reflect on the different types of violence that the women have experienced. So you might notice there's 16 women that I interviewed and 2 more that had publicly written and disclosed their experiences of violences in Iceland. So altogether, there's a representation of 18 women in this graph with different types of impairments, and in their little dresses of the figurines is abbreviations of impairments, and so ID for intellectual disability, VIP, visual impaired, and being one of them, very important people. Yes, and so the different types of violence are illustrated through different colors would come across. So if you notice, from brown being bullying, to system of violence, to disability discrimination, prejudice and microaggression, to sexual harassment, to rape, and so on and so forth. And among the perpetrators listed there are also staff members, family, partners, immigration services, police abroad, and strange people. That includes also strange women. In an artistic way, the way I'd like you to visualize perhaps this square, the bottom left one, is if you dismiss for a bit the different colors and just see that as black and white, if you like, it resembles a word cross puzzle. And I see that as how non-disabled people and maybe justice workers within the justice system see how our reporting or justice to us needs to be solved, or the difficulty that they pick on it and see in it as something, a puzzle that either needs to be solved or is too complicated to even address it, just artistically. And then on the top part, so the top left and the top right, you see that out of the 18 women, only 3 reported. 2 reported to the police, and the 3rd woman reported to the rights protection officers. The colored line represent the type of violence that they reported. So the first woman, out under the pseudonym of Mary, all the names used in the PowerPoints are pseudonyms. So Mary was subjected to sexual harassment by a male staff member. She told her mother, who believed her instantly and sought to seek justice with and for her daughter. And together they went to the respite care facility where violence happened. And given that that did not provide any information, any options, any further solution, then the mother decided to call the police. And the police informed the mother that Mary needed a lawyer, that this was a serious matter, and also a rights protector officer was to be involved. And from there on, the case started, and I'll talk to you about that in a bit. And the 3rd woman also reported her domestic violence to the rights protection officer. The 2nd woman to report to the police reported a hate speech, and that is represented by the black color. And just to say, so Mary's case has actually been part of my first article. So it's a 29-year-old woman with intellectual disability subjected to violence, to sexual harassment by a male staff member at a respite care facility in Iceland. The article is titled, "We Got Lucky with a Judge. Access to Justice for Disabled Women in Iceland." And in the slide, you also have the link of the article. We were told early in the week to do free promotion, so there you go. Yes, so this will come apparent because I'll keep referring to it, and specifically with the barriers within the justice system, but just to let you know about this. Then, given that Mary had a rights protection officer involved, and seeing the impact the rights protector officer had in her case, together with the fact that the 3rd woman reported their experienced violence to the rights protector officer, I sought to investigate their role, what they do, and who they are. So this will be my 2nd publication. It is titled, in quotes, "They guarantee understanding both ways. Rights protector officers as facilitator, of access to justice for disabled women." So this will be part of a special issue under the Scandinavian Journal for Disability Research, and I hope it will be published in the next few weeks. So keep an eye out there. I will come into describing their role in a minute, but today's presentation will be, as I said, focusing on the barriers and the facilitators of access to justice. And in this slide, I have grouped them into two columns, if you like. So under the barriers, I'm only focusing on the voice of the women, especially those that did not report, and also those that did not report all their types of violences. So I have categorized them as personal barriers, interpersonal barriers, so barriers in relation to others, and sociocultural barriers. And on the other side of the slide, I have facilitators. Many of them aren't surprised, I'm sure, to many of you. Education and awareness raising, training, provision of procedural and reasonable accommodation, rights protection officers, again, as I'll be described in a minute, and look. You might notice also that the family is under both, and we'll come to that in a minute as a comparison between the experiences of two disabled women when they disclose to their family. But first, let me start with personal barriers. Now, there is many categories that I have, and I'll be writing about, but due to time limitations, I'm only focusing on the lack of understanding or lack of knowledge on what violence is, and specifically what sexual violence is. Many of the women spoke about at the time, and even after they experienced violence, they didn't understand that what they had experienced was actually, in fact, sexual violence, and in some cases, rape. And there's also women at the time of the interview who had no understanding of what violence is and explicitly told me they don't know what violence is. And I want to quote here, and Siobhan is going to read the quote of what Linda talks about when she experienced rape and how she did not recognize that at the time.
I was violated. Deep inside, I was violated. Deep inside, I thought this. But I just thought this was a part of the kinky stuff. This is allowed when you're in a relationship. A boyfriend, he cannot rape you. Your boyfriend does not rape you.
Yes, so that also reflects not just the personal barriers, but also connects to the community silence at the time, which is under sociocultural barrier, that the community did not speak about violence, did not speak about sexual violence, and therefore this reflects on the personal level barriers. And this is also captures with a part of Hannah's quote, which reads, back then, no one spoke about this. I had no idea where to go. So part of this lack of knowledge was also on where to seek support, where to go to report. Even if you did recognize that what you experienced was violence, you didn't know where to go. So moving next to the interpersonal barriers, I'm highlighting here the fear of not being believed. And as Ren here highlights that due to their impairment, and identifying as a person with autism and their distrust on police, they feared being believed, so they did not report. In their words,
I have a general distrust of law enforcement, and I don't think they would have our best interest in mind, especially autistic individuals. I wouldn't be believed.
And in terms of the quote on your right is Lilia's, and I'll come to that in a minute. So as you might remember when I said when Mary told her mother, the mother believed her instantly and started the process. That was not the case of Lilia, who told her mother when she was raped by a stranger. I want you to hear her words first before I comment on that, please.
It actually got to a point that my parents didn't believe me. My mom said, yeah, I did this when I was young. I had sex with a guy and then I regretted it so much that I just told everyone he raped me. And I was like, okay, that's not what happened. But that wasn't how I felt.
Yes, the quotes are raw as the woman said it. So in other words, Lilia also said about I was brought by my family to a pharmacy, but the morning after pill, we went home and the case was closed. We didn't speak about it again. So comparing this response with Mary's mother's response, we can say that family can, in different circumstances or situations, can be a facilitator of access to justice, just as Mary's mother was for her. But in Lilia's case, the mother was, and the family, because the father was there too, served as a barrier to accessing justice. And even if she didn't know where to go, served as a barrier to stop her for seeking that information, for knowing where to go, where to report, or simply seek help. So the fact that they understood or knew to get the morning after pill, it leaves food for thought that do they believe, do they not, or do they just want to close the case and dismiss it altogether? So moving next to sociocultural barriers, again, I have many categories on this, but I want to highlight these specifically given the theme of the conference. And I want to start with Laura. So 2 out of the 16 women I interviewed are of foreign origin, but live in Iceland, one being from an EU country and one from a non-EU country. And I want to highlight what Laura spoke to me about given her experience with police in her country of origin, which has been removed from the quote, she would never approach police in Iceland, even though they may be different. She also, so in her words, if you don't mind, Siobhan.
I don't know. Maybe I'm scared to go to the police because I'm scared of everything. Something with police, because I have a post-traumatic syndrome after the country of origin. I am scared long time. I'm scared here. Taxi also. Because here taxi is like big black car. In country of origin, black car, only policeman. Yeah.
Yes, so this woman, her story to me identifies a lot with a research done on foreign women and their approach to police in country of residence. And as many of us know here, that when it comes to other research, foreign disabled women or whatever the category or the target group of the research disabled women, we are usually forgotten. So I wanted to highlight this, that the perception of police in your country of origin affects how you see police in the country of residing country. Laura also stated that as somebody who doesn't speak Icelandic and doesn't speak English either, it's hard to communicate, even if I went to the police. Now, this is another woman who had no idea of any supports, whether there could be translators, there could be any other supports provided if she was to report. The other category I want to highlight to you in terms of the socio-cultural barriers is the belief among the women who did not report that justice is not reporting is not justice nor part of it. Now, returning again to Lilia, who was raped a second time by a friend while she was asleep, who few years after her experience, she received a text by the ex-friend, the perpetrator, saying, "I'm sorry," without saying what he was apologizing for. But she highlighted this as an apology, and that's all she needed. She went to her parents and said, yes, I'm right. See this, I did not make this up. And she said, this is all she needed. She doesn't want justice in paper. And you can read her later her exact words, but more or less that's the gist of it. She doesn't want justice in paper. All she wanted was an apology, a recognition that what she'd experienced was in fact what she was describing and saying. Another woman who refers to system violence is Sandra, who talks about it doesn't have to be an apology, it has to be an accountability of wrongdoing towards her. So in her words, Sandra, the bottom.
But I think for me, what would feel, I would feel the most justice having the service provider and this professional who assessed me explicitly taking responsibility for what they did and to admit that they or tell me that they see that what happened was wrong. It is not about as much an apology as much as accountability.
Just to explain, so the service provider, she named the service provider, but obviously it was changed for confidentiality and privacy purposes. So yeah, this has been the voices of the women, and now I'm going to switch to facilitators. So on this slide on your right, I have illustrated the path or the journey of a disabled woman throughout the justice, and illustrated the different stages in, I think, a funny way, but I'll talk about them. So you might notice that I highlight 6 barriers within the justice system, and the bottom 3 illustrated gates seem to be simpler than compared to the top 3 gate or iron gate looking like barriers that the women have to get through, and that's why I'm highlighting this as a facilitator. So what helps to get through, and just to explain the image. So there's a disabled woman who could choose to speak to someone first, and then together go to the police or go directly to the police. And there's the number 112, which is the emergency line in Iceland. From there, a rights protector officers could be involved. The rights protector officer could be also the person you first go to tell, to disclose. Then the investigation stage is reflected here with jigsaw pieces. And the jigsaw pieces have a letter in them, so W for witness and victim statement and all of that. And from here to the prosecutor, that's when one of the hard gates starts, because it's hard, or I've been told by the justice workers that some cases are just dropped at the investigation stage because they can't get enough evidence to put it to the prosecutor. Now, the prosecution stage, I have illustrated here with a weighing scale. In the words of the prosecutors that I interviewed, they talk about weighing the case, and if it's very likely or likely to end up in a guilty verdict, they send it to court. If there is some information missing that could make the case stronger, they send it back to the police. Otherwise, they drop the case. And here is where most of the cases are dropped by the prosecutor. All the cases involving sexual violence are always sent to the prosecutors in Iceland, but also that's where they mostly get dropped. And the second gate, or hardest gate, is from the prosecutor towards the court, and from in the court into getting a positive outcome. So now I want to draw back to Mary's case and highlight what facilitated her access to justice and what made her case get through, but also end up in a positive outcome. And on the right, on the left that you see the screen, I have listed spokesperson. Now, spokesperson and rights protection officers are technically procedural accommodations. They are covered by the Act on the Protection on the Rights of Disabled People 2011, which does not form part of the criminal legislation, but it is part of the welfare and the support services for disabled people law. However, the spokesperson is not a guardian. It's an assistant in making decisions for those with disability who are of adult age, but due to their impairment, face difficulties in protecting and accessing their rights. In Mary's case, this was her mother. So I'm not sure how I'm doing with time, but I'll try and speed up. Okay. Finish. So 2 more seconds. So it was the mother who facilitated. I mean, she started the case by actually calling the police because she doubted that this wasn't right, what was experienced by her daughter. And the police confirmed that, informed the mother that Mary needed a lawyer, needed a rights protection officer, and from there on started the case. So reasonable accommodation provided to Mary was she was given extra time. She gave her police statement at a different facility in Iceland called Bjarkarlíf, which is the Family Justice Center for Victims of Violence. And so instead of a police station, she visited the courtroom in advance of the hearing and so on. And that is all due to the help of the rights protection officers, which I summarized here have a tridimensional role. I mean, they have also other roles outside the justice system or the access to justice support for disabled people, but I'm only focusing here. So first and foremost, the rights protection officers are to support the disabled person. Second, they are to request reasonable and procedural accommodation for the disabled person depending on their needs. And third, they are to advise the justice workers on what, why, and how these accommodations are to be provided. Just like with everything, this also has their limitations, and I've reflected this with these brackets around, but I'm out of time, so I'm happy to answer questions on that. Briefly, so in terms of the provision of these accommodations, the right protection officers, as I said, have limitation, and one of those is the fact that they cannot demand the accommodations needed. They can only request them. And as this lawyer puts it in this quote, and you can read this later, but I'll talk about, says, the way we accommodate people is depending on who is the judge. Some judges are more open to accommodation and others just follow the law strictly. This judge summarized the Mary's case, as she was Mary's lawyer, said that we got lucky with the judge. And they indeed got lucky with the judge, because I myself got lucky to interview this judge myself, who says, and I only quote the bottom of her quote here, that says, if we are to serve justice, we must have this right. And by that, she's highlighting the importance of proactive provision of reasonable and procedural accommodation in order to get as much as a good statement we can get from the victim. That involves accommodating the victim. Now, I want to leave you finally with a quote from my first publication, that access to justice should rest on systematic protection, not accident or happenstance. Never mind luck. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Eliona, and I think that really well highlighted the importance of structural and systemic reforms and proactive measures, as well as the multiple and intersecting barriers that arise in relation to reporting and recognition of violations that occur. I'm going to introduce now our third and final panelist, Dr. Shruti Venkatachalam, who's a researcher primarily interested in investigating violence and abuse perpetrated against disabled women. She is currently a research fellow at the University of Leeds, where she works on a project focused on domestic violence and abuse among women with multiple sclerosis. As the impact lead for the project, she engages in generating and pursuing knowledge exchange and impact activities related to victim support for women with multiple sclerosis and disabled women more broadly, both within clinical settings and beyond. Shruti completed her PhD in social policy from the University of Bristol, and her doctoral research explored how disabled women who are victims, survivors of violence and abuse comprehend and pursue their idea of justice. Additionally, she has researched the experiences of disabled women rape survivors within the criminal justice system in India, and she is particularly interested in theories of justice, intersectionality, social power dynamics, and feminist reflexive methodologies. And she has co-produced research reports and evidence briefings on violence against disabled women. Shruti, thank you. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, yeah. I've been working in this field of violence against disabled women for nearly a decade. I started my first research project in 2014. It was a 2-year research project where I looked at how disabled women, rape survivors, navigate the criminal justice system in India. So as part of the research, I interviewed disabled women rape survivors along with other other professionals within the criminal justice system, like police, lawyers, social activists, and journalists who report on cases of disabled women and violence. So the key findings of that project was disabled women reported that they had many struggles, stereotypes, and stigma when they have to make complaints and pursue the court proceedings. And also, there was a high rate of secondary victimization that the disabled women were subjected to by various professionals within the criminal justice system. So as part of that research, I had a question which I posed to disabled women. I asked them, since they had their cases ongoing in the court, I asked them how you see justice for yourself. So, uninterestingly, the disabled women whom I interviewed, none of them mentioned that their understanding of justice is not something that they see within the legal system. So they had different views about justice, and to pursue that further. In my PhD research, which I conducted between 2018 to 2023, I particularly looked at the experiences of disabled women who are victim survivors of domestic abuse, and how they particularly conceptualize the idea of justice in relation to their experience of violence and violence, disability, and sociocultural background. So when I looked at the existing literature, looking into because when we talk about justice, there are various theories and concepts across disciplines, like both within legal and non-legal disciplines like sociology and feminist literatures. But when you look at how justice is actually understood by victim survivors, there are very few studies across the global north and global south. So as part of my methodology, using feminist narrative methods and qualitative approach, I interviewed 18 disabled women with physical disabilities in India. So I did in-depth interviews, and to make sure that in order to capture the intersectional voices of disabled women, I managed to recruit disabled women from diverse backgrounds in terms of religion, socioeconomic context, and also other factors. Like I had disabled women from both urban and rural setting. In order to analyze the data, I mainly used the theory of intersectionality and power dynamics for analyzing the data. So some of the violence, that some of the domestic abuse that surfaced, when I analyzed my data, were physical violence, emotional and verbal abuse, economic, financial control and exploitation, reproductive control, and coercive behaviors on the basis of disability. Before I move on to the key, the main understanding of justice, I would like to. I've divided my presentation into looking into the barriers and challenges at 3 levels, like at individual level, family and community level, and systemic level. So, and the reason for this is to kind of unpack the complexities that that surround the experiences of violence among disabled women. So, at an individual level, the key findings from my research showed that the intersectional identities and the intersectional identities okay. So the intersectional identities do have a significant impact in how disabled women experience violence. For example, disabled women with multiple privileges in terms of sound financial background, like access to support, in terms of access to family support and other resources, they were able to, their experience of violence and abuse was different from women who did not have any access to support and who had a disadvantaging background. And along with that, in terms of looking at how disabled women resist violence, or how disabled women how they get themselves more vulnerable to violence, is also shaped by their intersectional background. As I said, in terms of their social class, economic background, their education, the urban-rural divide, and also their family support. So when I looked at the experiences of when I looked at the experiences of how disabled women resist violence, it had a significant relation to the perpetrators, because the perpetrator's relationship to disabled women was important in how the disabled women were managing to end or escape the abusive relationship. And in many cases, disabled women, for disabled women, the perpetrators are someone who also provide care, particularly in Indian families where we don't have access to formal support, care support. And when we talk about perpetrators, for disabled women, perpetrators did involve both family members from natal and marital home. And in many cases, the perpetrators were not single. There were multiple perpetrators that the disabled women had to kind of navigate in order to manage her experience of violence. So at a family and community level, there were also other factors that served as barriers for disabled women. So one was to do with the cultural and religious norms within the communities, particularly the area where I gathered data for my research. Most of the families, irrespective of their background, once a disabled woman is married, she is there's a social norm for the woman to hold the marital relationship, irrespective of any forms of abuse that she experiences, because it is something that the families relate to their honor. It's seen as a family honor and values that the parents kind of force disabled women to hold the abusive relationship, no matter what they what sort of struggles that they undergo. As I mentioned before, in India, the lack of accessible, the lack of formal support services is a big barrier that prevents disabled women to make to make informed choices about leaving their abusive relationship, because they are heavily dependent on their families families and the local support that that they are dependent on. So moving on from there, so there are also systemic barriers, like systemic level barriers and challenges that affect disabled women. So one is access to statutory services, like to report or to seek any support for the when a disabled woman is experiencing domestic abuse. One is like in terms of physical accessibility, the existing resources are not accessible to disabled women, and also for many disabled women, like who live in rural areas or who live in like suburbs, they don't have access to they don't have access to access to police stations or other services. So very limited access, and even when disabled women manages to navigate all the barriers, and when she goes and complains to the police, disabled women are often not believed, and there is high level of normalization of violence, particularly when disabled women report about domestic violence, because of the nature and intensity of violence is often measured in terms of seeing the seeing the action of violence as violence. In many cases, in many instances, what happened is that emotional violence, or even mostly family violence, is something that gets normalized. Not only among disabled women, but also among non-disabled women. So when it comes to disabled women, the authorities often often say to disabled women that you are disabled and you don't have rights to complain about about violence, because you're privileged in some or the other way. At least you got someone to look after. So so that becomes a big barrier when we and even if even if the disabled woman manages to file a complaint after going through all these re-victimization, often she gets she gets asked insensitive questions during investigation and when she gives testimony. And another big problem that we have is inaccessible shelters, when a disabled woman leaves the abusive environment. There is no accessible shelters, and there is no financial support to look after if there is a child or something. There is no financial support for that, and also to meet with the disability-related costs. So after looking, after discussing all the barriers at micro, meso, and macro level, so finally, when we come to the point that what justice means to disabled women, because for many years there is a need and there is an there are so many research that has highlighted that access to justice is a huge. There are several barriers in accessing justice for disabled women. But at the same time, like when we are advocating for improving the access to justice, I think it is also important to advocate for like what sort of justice are we kind of pushing for, or what justice means to these disabled women who get subjected to secondary victimization when facing with authorities. So one of my main research question was how justice is like understood and conceptualized by disabled women. And as I said in my methodology, previous slide, I interviewed 18 disabled women, and out of 18 disabled women, only 4 disabled women, like they sought the legal justice system mainly to seek divorce from their partners. Apart from, other disabled women did not report or did not seek the formal justice system for support due to various barriers and like lack of resources. So, and even when those 4 disabled women, when I asked them what justice means to them, often it was the disabled women understanding of justice was something they see justice as agency. So for them, it is like having the voice and choice to make their own decisions and what they think. And another conceptualization of justice came out as justice as accountability, as my co-panelists like mentioned, like with her quote, like mainly disabled women. There is a need like for disabled women they want the perpetrators to acknowledge that what they did was wrong, because and disabled women they cited that the legal justice system just punishes the perpetrator, and beyond that, there is no scope for them to kind of to make their voices heard and to get an acknowledgement from their perpetrator. And they also see disabled women also see justice as building resistance and resilience. Because in cases of domestic violence, disabled women are often made to feel that they are powerless and weak and independent. So they wanted to, for them, they see justice as to rebuild their skills and gain power to make their own choices. And finally, disabled women also see justice as gender justice, where they want to advocate for fellow disabled women who experience violence and abuse. So with that, I would like to conclude my presentation, and I'm happy to take further questions. Thank you so much.